calling special effects. 19th century image makers reworked reality to make their stories picture perfect.
They weren't photojournalists, they weren't scientists. They were trying to capture realities that maybe you couldn't see with the ordinary eye. Painting was the previous main medium for visual images, and no one expected that to be an exact lifelike view. It was the artist's vision.
A great example is this engraving of Abraham Lincoln in a heroic stance. It looks as well composed as a painted portrait. But it's just a simple image of our 16th president, right? Sorry, but it's as phony as a $3 bill. Lincoln may have freed the slaves, but this image maker, Thomas Hicks, also took a few liberties, and it wasn't discovered for decades. The picture is actually a cut and paste job. It's a composite of two separate images. Lincoln's head was taken from the famous photograph by Matthew Brady, which was later used for the $5 bill. It was then grafted onto a different photograph, one of John C. Calhoun, the South Carolina senator and U.S. vice president who died 10 years before Lincoln was even elected.
He died in 1850. He was also a very robust, stocky, and strong-looking man. And Abraham Lincoln was sort of gangly and never struck anybody as necessarily very physically tough or robust or imposing.
Calhoun's posture was more commanding. So, snatching his body and grafting it onto Lincoln made the president look more presidential.
To 19th century photographers, the outcome was more important than the process.
Apparently, this engraving creator wasn't worried about the irony that he was adding Lincoln's head onto the body of one of slavery's leading defenders. And it gets worse.
There were numerous photographs of Abraham Lincoln's head on the body of George Washington, of Henry Clay, of numerous other political figures, because it was a cheap way to recycle previously made prints.
But iconic con artistry isn't restricted to two dimensions. It also happens in the 3D world of patriotic shrines. We all know Abe Lincoln was born into poverty in this log cabin in Hodgenville, Kentucky. His official birthplace site. It's housed in a Greek-style temple, and it's a stirring symbol of how, in America, even a backwoods rail splitter can rise to become president, right? Sorry, but Abe's childhood home isn't so honest. Yes, Lincoln was born in a log cabin, but not this one. Records show his actual birthplace burned down in 1840. 20 years before he became president. So how did this humble abode get the credit as Lincoln's birthplace?
In the 1890s, an entrepreneur went out and found a cabin in the area and decided this counts as the Lincoln birthplace cabin. It's good enough.
And soon after, the bogus birthplace became a traveling attraction.
I think they showed it in Louisville, it went to the Buffalo World's Fair, and there it got shown side by side with the cabin that Jefferson Davis was born in. Also, well, Jefferson Davis wasn't even born in a log cabin, but never mind.
Then, during transport, Yogi backfit and mixed logs from both cabins together. So when they reached Coney Island, the two homes of these Civil War rivals were combined into one big Lincoln Davis cabin. When the tour ended, the logs were disassembled and stored in a Long Island basement. It wasn't until 1916 that a well-meaning preservationist society gave the logs to the Department of Interior, which built this shrine for them. Unfortunately, the reassembled cabin was too big for the temple, so a section of it was sawed off to make it fit. The result is this inspiring fabrication.
Even the Park Service themselves refer to it as the traditional cabin, which is a curious use of the word traditional to mean fake.
Equally fake is the claim that Lincoln was born poor. He wasn't. His family owned 2 farms and additional real estate. And while it's true that he did split rails in his youth, this fact wasn't glorified until he ran for president. During most of his career, Lincoln was a railroad lawyer, But running as a corporate attorney doesn't make you a man of the people. So his rail-splitting days were hyped up for the campaign, because it's what people wanted to hear.
I think it signifies to Americans that we are uniquely the land of opportunity, that you can rise to the presidency from such a humble beginning.
Fair enough. But what happens when patriotic images go beyond pretty pictures and into the graphic realities of war? It's often said the first casualty of war. War propaganda has always depended on creative image makers, and early shutterbums followed this tradition more often than not when it comes to photo ops from the battlefield. Seeing isn't always believing. For instance, we all know that during the Civil War, photographers like Matthew Brady braved the dangers of combat to capture real events as they happened. Before the media started tampering with the truth, photographers delivered the raw, unedited reality of warfare, right? That idea needs to be shot down. From the earliest days, photos from the front weren't always what they seemed. When the first pictures of bodies were taken in the Civil War, they had a sensational impact, and photographers capitalized on a good thing.
Photographers were willing to enhance that effect in the Civil War by moving bodies into more dramatic positions to create a more vivid impression than simply taking what they found on the site.
This famous photo was taken at Gettysburg in 1863. It's called The Home of a Rebel Sharpshooter, and it features a Confederate soldier's corpse in a rocky niche on the battlefield. It looks like the realistic and gruesome aftermath of a firefight. But in reality, it's as posed as your favorite selfie. We know this because a century later, scholars noticed another photo titled A Sharpshooter's Last Sleep, and it shows the same dead soldier, but in a different location. The photographer, Alexander Gardner, had moved the body some 40 yards to a more dramatic background.
Gardner and his associates propped it up, turned the face towards the camera, made it look like he had just been killed while he was about to shoot his rifle.
The soldier is called a sharpshooter, but the weapon in the photo is not a sharpshooter's rifle. But that didn't matter to them. Back then, taking a picture required lots of time, effort, and expense. Every image had to count.
So in the 1800s, basically, if they couldn't capture something the way that it happened, they would just recreate it or stage it.
Their thought was a photograph is like a painting, and in a painting, you move things for the best effect.
By the 1940s, wartime journalism was ingrained in American culture, and audiences studied photographs with a more discerning eye. So when images came back of the U.S. Marines planting a flag on the Japanese island of Iwo Jima in February 1945, savvy journalists at Time magazine reported that the moment had been staged. It had to be. Look how perfect it is. It turns out, Time was out of sync with the facts. This moment was real. It's just been the victim of a misunderstanding that has haunted it for nearly 70 years. Iwo Jima was the first American attack on the Japanese home. 6,000 Marines and 20,000 Japanese would die in one of the bloodiest battles of the war. And on the fourth day of the fight, 3 Marines and 1 Navy corpsman planted an American flag on the summit of Mount Suribachi.
It was a dramatic moment. They were taking the hill. They were taking the mountain, and they eventually took Iwo Jima, and it was a turning point in the Pacific Theater.
But there was a problem. Nobody could see the flag.
The flag was too small. So what they did was take that flag down, and they were going to hoist a larger flag. And as that was happening, Joe Rosenthal, who was a photographer, was coming up the hill.
Rosenthal quickly snapped the picture without using his viewfinder. Afterwards, he took the second picture of the Marines posed around the flag, a clearly staged event. And this image is what created confusion when he was later asked about it.
So when someone said, was that photograph posed, the one by the flag, he said yes. Time magazine then went and publicized this idea.
Time later apologized for the misunderstanding. It's too late.
And so there's a legend now, and it still persists to this day. You talk to people, they say, oh yeah, the flag raising image, oh yeah, that was staged picture. It was not.
Rosenthal had the last laugh, though, because the little time work to build the event on the stage, and his photograph, considered one of the greatest ever taken, was the inspiration for the U.S. Marine Corps Memorial that stands proudly just outside of Washington, D.C. today. The picture is of a major historic event, but back home, images of everyday life that seem to be fully spontaneous were, in fact, a whole lot more contrived. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Excuse me. Sorry. Whoa! Sorry about that. Oh, hey. Today, when you see a photograph, you never know what to believe because pictures could be filtered or photoshopped or finagled with so easily. But what about slices of life that photographers just happen to catch on film? Did anybody see my lunch? Like this famous photo from 1932. Construction workers on the new RCA building having lunch 850 feet above Manhattan. An iconic image shot by a photographer who just happened to spot this lofty lunch break, right? The myths in that story pile up higher than the Empire State Building. Lunch atop a skyscraper, as it's called, is one of the most popular pictures ever taken. The juxtaposition of the dizzying height and the men's oblivious fearlessness is incredibly cool, and it sure looks spontaneous. But it's actually a publicity photo for Rockefeller Center to promote their new skyscraper. A photographer was hired to take it.
A photographer could not just sort of walk in off the street and take a picture on the, that high up on the Rockefeller Center. You have to get in there in the first place.
Taken during the Great Depression, with a quarter of the workforce unemployed, these men symbolize a land of opportunity. Americans who not only do hard work, but do it with style. They are real construction, but the picture is framed to create the illusion that their daily lunch break is a high-wire act. In fact, all this photographed is the Radio City Rock. We know this because there are more photographs of the same guy in different and really absurd poses.
There's one where four of the men pretend to be sleeping.
What's more, the picture gives the impression that the men are snoozing over a 5-story drop, but experts claim there was a floor right below. But who cares? It's a cool picture with a clear purpose.
It's showing a positive message about workers and advertising Rock Center at the same time.
As long as the image delivers an honest message, most of us are okay with a little stagecraft. Same goes with film voting Rosie, the fictional female factory worker of World War II. During the war, weapons manufacturers found themselves short of workers who had been sent off to fight.
So they had to do the unthinkable, which was encourage housewives who didn't necessarily need the paycheck to leave the domestic sphere and enter into these factories and plants.
In an effort to get as many volunteers as possible, the military created a propaganda campaign posting what are now considered iconic images of female empowerment.
The popular image is of Rosie the Riveter because it's a pretty image. It's a woman that she's both attractive and she's doing serious work for the war, so it's very patriotic. And you see her image used in political campaigns today, lunch boxes, magnets, their t-shirts, with the sort of riff on that. We can do it.
And it was a success. Not only the U.S. government bring a staggering number of gifted workers with Rosie by their side, they also simultaneously launched the women's rights revolution and changed the course of history. True, the Rosie campaign issued women make into society.
He's great. What the devil does a woman want to be a soldier for? That's waste of time.
So they staged all the photos of these pretty working women wearing lipstick and looking very feminine.
My wife works, people think I can't support her. Well, I don't mind my wife working, but who's gonna run my home? It's okay now, but what about after the war?
Rosie the Riveter is a carefully composed balancing act between the need to get women on the assembly line and the idea that a woman's primary place was still in the home.
What do you do here and take kids, millions of them? Well, they have to classify you here. I never should do best. Then I'm a typist till the day I die. Now, the things I do best to raise children and cook. Well, I think they'll let you cook.
The message was twofold. You didn't have to lose your femininity to work in war production, and these pretty women would, of course, lose their jobs when the men came back home.
How about after the war? Are you going to keep on working? I should say not. When my husband comes back, I'm going to be busy at home. Good for you.
There was no social revolution here. In fact, the wholesome domestic goddess image of 1950s television, where mom stayed at home while dad went to work, was a direct result of the media effort to get women out of the workplace after the war. So the men, once again, be the family breadwinner. Father knew best. And this carefully composed propaganda would, in large part, set the women's rights movement back decades. Now, it's one thing when images are concocted to serve a war effort, but what happens when the filmmakers start changing the war itself? Today, a lot of war footage we see comes from embeds, reporters traveling with an army, and it raises questions about how much of their reporting is real and how much is staged. Of course, back in the good old days, reporters didn't do this. They were objective and never interfered with the action, right? Sorry, we're gonna yell cut on that bit of fiction. Embeds go back to the earliest days of film, as do questions about their objectivity. In the case of the Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa, he was so savvy to the power of the photo op that in 1914, he signed a movie deal with Hollywood producers D.W. Griffith and Harry Aiken, Mutual Films, to shoot his life story as it happened, though not necessarily the way it happened.
Griffith and Aiken were not interested in making what we would now term as a historical documentary or a newsreel. They wanted to tell a good story, and I think Villa went along with that. He wanted to support the myth of Pancho Villa in the public's mind as a revolutionary Robin Hood.
His contract stipulated that he'd provide moving picture thrillers in any way that were consistent with his military plans. Unfortunately, the original film no longer survives. But according to some accounts, he let the movie makers call the shots. I mean, the shots with guns.
Some of the mythology is that Pancho Villa kind of coordinated his attacks so that they would happen during that perfect filming time period.
Legend says the shooting, that is the shooting with guns, would start at 9 a.m. and stop at 4 p.m. when the lights started to fade.
For me, I think that's kind of bogus. At 4 or 5 o'clock, the filming may have stopped, but the battle stopped when the shooting stopped.
Another claim is that Pancho Villa interrupted battles or changed their location to suit the needs of the filmmakers.
There is some evidence from newspapers at the time that at the Battle of Ojinaga in 1914, that Pancho Villa did in fact delay his attack to allow the Mutual Film cameramen to get into place.
Some said that if the director didn't like the authentic battle footage, Villa's own men would reenact it for the camera. Raoul Walsh, the 25-year-old actor-filmmaker shooting the movie, wasn't above doing this. But is that the way it happened?
It's hard to believe that this fairly inexperienced young American is going to suddenly show up with a movie camera and a few people and start dictating terms to 9,000 to 10,000 of Pancho Villa's soldiers.
Still, we know that some of the sequences were staged, because Walsh himself portrayed a younger Pancho Villa in scenes shot by the Mutual producers back in Los Angeles.
We can imagine that the Mutual guys went home and said, oh, actually we don't have quite as much good footage as we thought we did. We might have to do some massaging of the footage that we have.
It's hard to say how much of the final film was staged. But it was a financial success for Mutual and a PR success for Via.
They were successful because we still buy into that myth. That image of Pancho Villa that they portrayed back in 1914 is still very much how the public views him to this day. And I have to say, that's an amazing achievement.
Image makers have always tried to improve on reality, to tell their stories. But in an age of Photoshop fakery and digital trickery, it's more important than ever to double-check the facts, because seeing isn't always believing. We all think we know American history, but half-truths and legends often cloud the real story. Take that neon-lit city of sin, Las Vegas. Did you know it wasn't gambling that put it on the map, but the atomic bomb? Or that FedEx owes its success to a hot streak at blackjack? And how about that massive monument to American engineering, the Hoover Dam? Are there really bodies buried inside? And why was it repaired in secret? I'm Jamie Kaler. Join us as we deal out some of the hottest myths and pay off with the real story. Billed as the entertainment capital of the world, Las Vegas is a desert oasis of flashing lights, glitzy casinos, and luxury hotels. Think theme park more than metropolis, with most of its attractions packed along the legendary strip. 15,000 miles of neon tubing make Vegas one of the brightest spots on Earth. And legend has it that a mobster from the Big Apple invented Las Vegas. Is that story the real deal? Or just another mirage? The popular tale of how Las Vegas became a gambling mecca goes something like this. In 1941, a sharp-dressed gangster from New York named Benjamin Bugsy Siegel heads west to California to make his fortune. Along the way, he stops off in Nevada, a state with legalized gambling. Bugsy takes one look out at the vast empty desert and has a flash of genius. If he builds an upscale casino and hotel, high rollers and Hollywood stars in California will come. Bugsy convinces some mob bigwigs, including moneymaker Meyer Lansky, to bankroll the project. And in 1946, he opens the Flamingo, Las Vegas' first casino. The rest, as they say, is history. The gaming industry rakes in billions, luring visitors with legalized gambling, prostitution, and the chance to turn your last dime into a small fortune. I wouldn't bet on it. Let's start with Sin City's most enduring myth that Bugsy Siegel dreamed up Las Vegas and is responsible for turning this small western town into a gambling mecca.
It's not true that Bugsy Siegel invented Las Vegas or created Las Vegas or started it. Las Vegas was around for 40 years before Bugsy Siegel got involved with the Flamingo Hotel.
In fact, the Flamingo isn't the first casino on the Strip. It's the third, following the El Rancho Vegas in 1941 and the Last Frontier in 1942. The Flamingo isn't even Bugsy's idea. It's the brainchild of Billy Wilkerson, a Los Angeles-based nightclub owner and publisher of The Hollywood Reporter.
And he came up and he started building it, but he also drank too much and he gambled too much, and so he found himself out of money with this hotel about to get started, and then came Bugsy Siegel.
Bugsy, who's in Vegas working on the mob's horse race operation, sees the potential in the Flamingo and takes over the project.
So that's when he stepped in and took up where Billy Wilkerson left off. He followed Billy Wilkerson's idea, Billy Wilkerson's vision. He was just the one who carried the bucket in the end. And not only carried the bucket, but skimmed and stole and took lots and lots of money, mob money.
Bugsy spends an estimated $6 million to finish the Flamingo, 5 times the original amount. That doesn't make his mob buddies very happy, and it's probably what gets Bugsy whacked on June 20th, 1947.
a lot of people, especially the people in the mob, they thought it was the mob that did it. But nobody knows to this day who actually killed him.
It wasn't Bugsy Siegel's vision. It wasn't Bugsy Siegel's design. It was Bugsy Siegel's piggy bank, and it, got him iced in the end.
Despite a near disastrous opening, the Flamingo ultimately succeeds and ushers in a high-stakes, high-life era for Vegas. Today, the city's annual gaming revenue is a staggering $7.4 billion. That raises the ante on another. That gambling is the first industry to pour billions of dollars into Nevada's economy. Wrong again. Years before the casino boom, you won't believe which big-time industry delivered billions into the state's coffers.
Atomic testing, that's the crazy ant in the attic that Las Vegas would like people to forget.
Between 1951 and 1962, the U.S. military detonates 235 nuclear bombs. The test site located just 65 miles northwest of Vegas. The blasts shatter casino windows and rattle stacks of chips. But Uncle Sam assures everyone there's no danger.
Everybody in Las Vegas saying, that's really cool. So Las Vegas jumped on that bandwagon, and they were going to be the city the atomic bomb made famous. That was a logo that was promoted. And even the casinos jumped into it.
The casinos would have parties on the top floor of their hotels, and they would do all kinds of things to promote these tests and to bring people out from all corners of the country just to experience at least a glimpse of the mushroom cloud as it was going off at daybreak.
I've got another bombshell for you. Sin City's famous tagline is, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. But if you act on some widely held myths, this might be bringing home a police record. The Las Vegas Strip has some of the largest hotels in the world. But did you know the entire Strip lies outside the city limits of Las Vegas? It's really in the unincorporated towns of Paradise and Winchester, south of Vegas. Even the iconic Welcome to Fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada sign, a landmark since 1959, isn't in Las Vegas. After you pass it, you won't actually be in Las Vegas for another 4 miles. That's just one of the facts that lies outside our sight of the truth. Let's start with what is and what is not legal in Sin City. Certainly every type of gambling is available in Las Vegas. Oddly enough, Nevada has no state lottery. Maybe not so odd when you consider the casinos and their powerful lobbyists don't want any competition.
That's not to say that Nevadans don't play the lottery, because they do. They just have to go to Arizona or California to buy tickets.
But everyone knows prostitution is legal in Las Vegas.
Prostitution is not legal in the Las Vegas metropolitan area of Clark County. It was legal up to World War II. There was a red light district, downtown Las Vegas, which was closed by request of the U.S. Army. They didn't want the soldiers getting VD. And the county outlawed it in the early 1950s.
While money can't legally buy you sex or lottery tickets, it can buy you just about everything else, including the casino. One of the city's strangest myths claims that back in the 1960s, reclusive rich guy Howard Hughes bought the Desert Inn Hotel when its management demanded that he leave his room. Sounds like fiction, but it's a fact.
When it comes to Howard Hughes and the hotels in Vegas, the myths are the realities.
Howard Hughes had come to Las Vegas all through the late 1930s and 40s when he was a playboy and young, and he'd gamble and he'd party and had a good time for himself. They hadn't seen him for a while. All of a sudden he showed up on Thanksgiving Eve 1966. He stayed at the top of the Desert Inn Hotel, the penthouse. The management was all excited. They thought he was going to spend a lot of money and gamble and do what he had always done.
Amazingly, what almost no one in Vegas knows, that Hughes is a drug-addicted, 115-pound germaphobe with shoulder-length gray hair, negotiating business deals with the curtains drawn and windows and doors sealed shut with tape.
Very few people knew about Hughes' germophobia because he kept it very quiet and the guys around him didn't talk about it. used Kleenex to touch the doorknobs. He wouldn't even wear slippers. He wore Kleenex boxes on his feet when he would walk around.
The eccentric Howard Hughes doesn't gamble. In fact, he doesn't even leave his room. So when Christmas rolls around, the hotel staff decides it's time for Hughes to go.
They want him to leave because they had high rollers coming in for New Year's Eve, and Hughes didn't want to leave. He wanted to stay there, and ultimately said, I'll buy the hotel. And he did. In early 1967, he bought the Desert Hotel so he could stay in his room, literally.
The aging entrepreneur then snaps up 5 more casinos. By 1970, Hughes controls nearly 1/3 of the revenue earned on the Strip. That's a lot of cash. Hughes struck it rich in Vegas, but he arrived with a boatload of money. So, is it possible for the average person to come here and walk away rich?
It's much more likely you'll get hit by a lightning bolt.
Well, you just have to look around and see all these multi-million-dollar chandeliers and whatnot up there for nothing. Someone's paying for it. And it's usually the people that think they're going to win.
So, turning your last dollar into millions is something that only happens in books and movies, right? In fact, big gambles sometimes do pay off, big time. Just ask Fred Smith, the CEO of Federal Express.
FedEx in the early 70s was a small company. It was losing a lot of money. It was on the verge of going out of business. Then Fred Smith, the CEO, took the last $5,000 that this company had. He took it to Vegas.
Smith risks it all at the blackjack table and walks away with $32,000, enough to pay FedEx fuel bill for another week. The brief reprieve is all he needs. Within days, he manages to raise $11 million to keep the company afloat. And by 1976, FedEx turns its first profit of $3.6 million. The company now carries up to 17 million packages on its busiest day and is worth about $28 billion. Whether you win or lose, the bright lights of Las Vegas are something you never forget. But just what powers this neon paradise? And is it true that dead bodies help make it all possible? Every year, over 1 million people travel 30 miles southeast of Las Vegas to visit one of the world's greatest engineering marvels, Hoover Dam. Towering as high as a 70-story skyscraper and measuring over 2 football fields thick at its base, the dam created Lake Mead, the nation's largest reservoir, and provides hydroelectric power to cities all across the Southwest. But what else might the dam be holding back? How about secrets such as the number of bodies buried inside its concrete core, or just how close it came to collapsing? It's time to let the truth flow on through.
The whole world knows about Hoover Dam. It was something unlike anything else that had been built in the United States.
This is how most of us remember the story of the Hoover Dam. In the 1920s, the government dams up the Colorado River to provide water and electricity to the growing number of people moving to Las Vegas. So in 1931, over 20,000 men set about doing just that in a steep ravine located along the Nevada-Arizona border called Boulder Canyon. The work is hard, hot, and dangerous. Dozens die during the construction, including several who become entombed in the dam when giant buckets of wet concrete accidentally drop onto their heads. When the massive project finally finishes, Hoover Dam is hailed by President Roosevelt as America's greatest engineering feat. Many people, however, believe FDR's declaration is a bit premature. That's because the concrete deep inside the dam is still wet. That all sounds true, but there are a few fictions seeping through with the facts of this damn story. Let's start with the gruesome claim that bodies are buried inside the dam. It is true that 112 workers died during construction, but none of them are buried inside the dam.
When they were building the dam, they built it a few inches at a time. If you got buried in the dam, you would have had to lay there for a good week and a half before they would have gotten enough built up to get around you.
One fact about the fatalities is stranger than fiction.
Before the dam was even started, there were people surveying up and down the Colorado River looking for a good site to build a dam. And a surveyor named Jacob Genis got knocked off the raft that he was on, and he drowned. 13 years to the day after that, December 20th, 1935, his son, Patrick Genis, died in a fall at Hoover Dam that had just been completed. That really happened. The first man to die on the Boulder Canyon project, always the last man to die on the project, and they died on the same day.
Amazingly, that's true. 80 years later, scientists say the concrete is still hardened on the dam's core.
Concrete takes a while to set, to cure, and it generates a lot of heat when it does that. So that's why they don't generally pour great masses of concrete in one place, because it would take too long to cure, to set, and it might, by generating the heat, compromise the structure. So there was a technique that was pioneered at Hoover Dam to prevent all of that.
Every time they poured concrete, they laid copper piping, zigzagging it through, and they ran icy water through that as a way of continuing to cool the concrete.
But also at the same time, in the very, very deepest core of the dam, it is still curing, but not to such a degree, that it's going to compromise the structure.
And like many government-run construction projects, Hoover Dam isn't finished on schedule. Congress allotted 7 years to complete the dam. The project is actually finished early.
The head engineer was a guy named Frank Crowe, and he actually got it in a couple of years ahead of schedule. He did that by working his crews 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Unthinkable kinds of hours. 5,000 men on the job at one point, was shift after shift after shift.
When the dam was completed, everyone patted themselves on the back for a job well done. Well done. Well done, sir. Of course, that was before they found a flaw. One that threatened to send the dam crashing downriver. Hoover Dam is often referred to as Boulder Dam because, well, pay attention because this gets a little complicated. When the project began, the dam was called Boulder Dam because it was supposed to be built at Boulder Canyon. The location ultimately changed to Black Canyon, but the name stuck. That is until 1930, when the Secretary of the Interior surprises everyone by naming the dam after then-President Herbert Hoover. 3 years later, when FDR takes office, the new Secretary of the Interior changes the name back to Boulder Dam. But then, in 1947, Congress changes it back to Hoover Dam, and it's remained that way ever since. As it was complicated, Hoover might not have wanted his name associated with the dam if nothing had been done about another popular myth, claiming that the dam's construction was virtually flawless. In 1938, inspectors discover an alarming number of leaks. The dam has a major flaw, not in the visible concrete, but directly beneath, in the bedrock.
One of the things they were particularly worried about was what they do call upshoots, which is water that is creeping under and under and under, and the pressure of the water pushes the rock, it pushes the dam. That could be a very dangerous and fatal flaw if it's left unattended.
Hoover Dam's so-called grout curtain, drilled into the bedrock, is supposed to prevent any such seepage, but it had been poorly installed.
That was supposed to make a moisture barrier in the panel to keep the water from coming in from the lake, and little flaws in the rock, little flaws in the concrete, and creeping through it, releasing gushing, and then bursting someday. Well, they discovered that there was a lot more of that going on than they thought there should be.
If not fixed, the dam might suffer a catastrophic failure and collapse. As a result, workers labored in secret to rebuild the faulty grout curtain.
So they had to go back and start drilling holes back in the rock and through the concrete and pumping grout, and that went on for some years until they felt that they had done it enough that the leaks and the seeps had pretty much stopped.
Hush-hush work was completed in 1947. taking nearly twice as long as it took to build the Hoover Dam in the first place.
Something like that happened today. Can you imagine the media frenzy? But they took care of it, and it's been perfectly safe ever since.
Today, one of the most popular myths centers on just why Hoover Dam was built in the first place. Was it really to provide water and power to Las Vegas?
The dam had nothing realistically to do with Las Vegas. It had much more to do with flooding on the Colorado River. And they needed to do something to control that.
The Imperial Valley in Southern California was one of the greatest agricultural areas in the United States. And the Colorado River frequently jumped its banks, and it would just meander right straight across towns and roads and farms, and it was destroying millions of dollars worth of property and produce. And so that's why they built Hoover Dam, was to control the flooding hundreds and hundreds of miles away downriver from the dam itself.
Hoover Dam doesn't just control the Colorado. It also provides huge amounts of hydroelectric power. During peak periods, its 17 generators put out enough electricity to supply a city of 750,000 people. And that's what keeps the bright lights of Las Vegas burning.
Hoover Dam was never intended to even generate power. That was just sort of a byproduct of the dam itself. And Las Vegas gets maybe 4 or 5% of its power from Hoover Dam, and that's all. The bulk of it goes to Arizona and California. That was decided by contract long before they started building. Las Vegas' power comes from natural gas-generated power plants scattered around the Las Vegas Valley.
It lights LA, it lights Glendale, it lights places like this, much more so than it does Las Vegas.
The reservoir created by the dam is known as Lake Mead. This man-made lake provides Vegas with almost all of the H2O needed for its numerous golf courses and spectacular fountains. Recently, however, severe drought has reduced the flow of water from the Colorado River, causing lake levels to drop and threatening to leave the dam high and dry.
Las Vegas gets almost 90% of its water from Lake Mead. So even if Hoover Dam stopped generating power, it wouldn't affect Vegas very much, but if it ever fell low enough that it couldn't provide the water, Las Vegas would be in big trouble.
The Hoover Dam is much more than a big wall blocking some running water. It's actually the lifeblood to millions. So the next time you're out west and you turn on the tap for that delicious glass of water, remember the American worker. Because while the fictions can make for a great story, the facts usually tell an even better one. We all think we know American history. But when it comes to our pioneering aviators, it's often more myth than truth. Take those brainy bicycle makers, the Wright brothers. Did you know their flyer first took off 3 days before the flight captured in this famous photo? Or that on the same day as their historic triumph, they also suffered a disaster. And how about our favorite missing person, Amelia Earhart? Did you know her hands never touched the controls on the flight that made her famous? I'm Jamie Taylor. Let's fly above the cloudy legends into the wild blue yonder of the truth. A little more than a century ago, the idea of human flight was pure fantasy. Now, 3 billion people fly every year. And it all started with two brothers that one historian has called the computer geeks of their day.
The mythic image is that you have these two bicycle makers from this middle-sized, middle American town in Ohio who just kind of luck into the invention of the airplane. And of course, it's nothing like that at all.
Here's the version of events we've all heard. Wilbur and Orville are American everything. Talented tinkerers holed up in their Dayton, Ohio bicycle shop. They hammer out their revolutionary plane with no help or inspiration from other early pioneers of flight. And they take it for its maiden voyage above the sands of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina on December 17, 1903.
The airplane came off the rail, and flew 120 feet for 12 seconds at a world record speed of 40 miles an hour.
The Wrights' short hop that day makes global headlines. In short order, they're buzzing awestruck crowds with their flyer and are hailed as heroes. And before you can say your seat cushion can be used as a flotation device, their famous airplane is whisked inside the Smithsonian Institution. Roger? Those so-called facts about the Wrights are all wrong. Starting with the idea that the brothers are just average Joes.
They were not just bicycle mechanics from Ohio. They were scientists. They were serious scientists.
In a lot of ways, they really were kind of natural geniuses when it came to engineering.
In spite of being naturally brilliant, both brothers were also high school dropouts. Wilbur never finished because the family moved before he graduated. And Orville quit because he was more interested in starting his own printing press. Being such brainy inventors, it didn't take them long to engineer that first flyer, right?
Everybody likes to think that progress proceeds smoothly, and it doesn't. And it didn't for the Wright brothers.
The Wrights solved the riddle of flight only after 5 years of painstaking research, methodical experimentation, and daring test flights. They designed and built a series of kites and gliders, even their own wind tunnel, before even starting on their revolutionary airplane.
I think if they'd known they were going to have to do all that at the outset, they wouldn't have been so quick to take up the challenge of the flying machine.
The Wrights' challenge is all the more daunting because they don't rely on the previous work of any early flight pioneers, right? We think of them as working in a vacuum because it makes the Wright brothers all the more brilliant and heroic. But they first rev up their flight plans in 1899 by building on the ideas of an earlier innovator.
The Wright brothers had enormous admiration for Otto Lilienthal. He was a German gliding pioneer who had made maybe as many as 2,000 glides. And in fact, he was known as the Flying Man.
He even went so far as to build his own hill, so he had somewhere to jump off of to do his experiments, to try and determine what was the best airfoil shape to produce the lift that he needed in order to fly.
Lilienthal suffers a fatal glider accident in 1896. But his legacy lives on as the Wrights incorporate his data about airfoil shapes into their wing design. But seeking a wing construction technique stronger than Lilienthal's, they turned to the designs of another American flight pioneer, Octave Chanute.
He had taken two thin wings and put them together with struts and wires to create a beam structure that was just incredibly strong. And the Wright brothers liked that idea. They draw from the past, but they have this ability to envision how this thing can really work and make critical changes that enables them to move forward.
And the Wrights move forward to that historic day, December 17th, 1903, when they try out invention for the first time on the sands of Kitty Hawk. Not so fast. That day actually marks their second attempt. The first, forgotten flight test, comes 3 days earlier.
They realized that once they succeeded, this was going to be a world-changing event. And so they flipped a coin to see who was going to be the pilot of that first flight. And Wilbur actually won the toss.
So, with Wilbur at the controls, the Wright flyer takes off, ready to soar into history. Or not.
It didn't go real well. He over-controlled on the elevator, the airplane pitches up and stalls.
And Wilbur lands awkwardly after 105 feet. Others might consider the awkward hop a success, but not the Wrights. They'll try again 3 days later, on the 17th. It would be a monumental triumph. But there's one big myth about what happened that day that flies in the face of the facts. The Wright brothers thought one of the airplane's most vital uses would be to ensure global peace. The airplane would, of course, allow nations to keep an eye on their neighbors and avoid the possibility of war. Their invention turned out to make war deadlier than ever. Orville and Wilbur were as wrong about all that as we are about December 17th, 1903. We all know that on that historic day, Wilbur and Orville pilot their airplane on a single 12-second flight, captured in this classic photograph, right? As earth-shaking as this moment is, it's just one of 4 flights the Wright brothers make that day. And this first one is the least impressive of them all.
If they had only done the one flight for 12 seconds, I don't think they would have been fully satisfied.
Piloted by Orville, the first airborne journey covers 120 feet. The second, with Wilbur at the controls, stretches to 175. Orville flew the third for 200 feet.
And the final flight that morning, which Wilbur makes, it's his turn now, about noon, he flies over 850 feet down the beach, and he's in the air for almost a minute, 59 seconds.
They proved conclusively after those 4 flights that they had conquered the barrier of taking a heavier-than-air aircraft and flying it through the air in a controlled fashion. It was only after the 4th flight that public witnesses said, we did it.
But we have forgotten those 3 later and longer flights because we have a fondness for firsts, especially the moment is frozen in time so artfully.
How often do you have a photograph of the first time something happens that's going to change the world?
And there's nothing like the glory that greets the Wrights when news of their staggering achievement instantly hits the front pages, right? Actually, only 4 newspapers carry the story the next day, and one of them buries it in the sports section. The problem, almost everyone dismisses the news as exaggerated.
I think a lot of people looked at them and said, oh yeah, really? Because there had been other stories about flying machine experimenters enjoying success, and those claims had proven false.
But in no time at all, the press and public hail Wilbur and Orville as heroes, and the Wrights show off their plane to those awestruck crowds. 5 years pass before that happens, and it's the Wrights' own doing. They refuse to fly publicly, while they endure the long process of securing their patents to make sure no one steals their designs.
They didn't want to come forward with their flying machine until they could feel assured that anyone who wanted to take advantage of their invention would have to pay them for the privilege.
But the Wrights' refusal to fly triggers major doubts about their claim that they solved the riddle of flight.
People weren't going to believe it until they actually saw it. They're not ready to accept that the Wright brothers have done this yet.
In 1906, the Wrights finally get their patents. Now they're free to show off what they can do. But that plane you see